All right, here we go. This series is called the Reality of God series, and it's by a gentleman named Stephen Hemler. He's a Catholic. He started an organization based on apologetics, and we'll get into what apologetics is in a minute. But he's a very nice man. He offered to actually come and give a talk, and then when he found out we were in Cleveland, he says, I can't travel that far. He lives in the New England area. But he was very gracious. He even offered, if we bought a certain number of books, to give it to us at his price, which was still pretty exorbitant. So first and foremost, remember that the only being, the only person, the triune person, is the only one who can wrap their mind around all this. So don't become overwhelmed. And I liked what Alpha said. Alpha talked about treating things as a crossword puzzle. You might get some of the clues going across, and that might give you a few letters going across down a clue, and it might click later. But my advice to you is absorb what you can, put the rest up on a shelf. If it comes to you later, it comes to you. This is more about being exposed and your experience after at the tables than it is about cramming all this information into your head. So who am I that I can give this talk? Well, first and foremost, I'm Mrs. Scott's baby boy, and she says I can do anything. So, and in full disclosure, that's my son Jacob, not me. People say the resemblance of our baby pictures is uncanny. I don't see it. I think he's 10 times more beautiful than I ever was. What really gives this its legitimacy is what's called a nil obstat and imprimatur. And if you're not familiar, the nil obstat is Latin for nothing obstructs, which means someone with a doctorate in sacred theology said, I went through this with a fine-tooth comb, and nothing stands in the way of Catholic dogma or morals. Then, predicated on that, a bishop signs off on it, and imprimatur says, let it be printed. What this does not say is that the Catholic Church endorses this. This is not an endorsement. It's just saying you have the right to choose to believe this or not believe this, and the Catholic Church has no real stance on it. It's entirely up to you. So during this presentation, my goal for you is to ask yourself what difference this information could make in your personal life, where you might see creation with new eyes, where this information might create opportunities for you to share your faith with others. I know in the other groups that's already happened, and there's some pretty cool stories. And see where this talk might shed more light on how much God loves you. There's going to be some pretty amazing visuals that the people in other groups liked very well. So, this is like Burger King, have it your way. If you see something missing that you want to see, or there's something missing that you want to hear, let me know. Talks have been adjusted subsequently based on feedback. So if you have feedback, please feel free to give it.
David, are you an atheist?
Yes.
When did you become an atheist?
Around age 12.
So I start that short little snippet just to impress upon us that it starts early. The age of reason is when we allow children to go to communion and first confession. And a few years later, he says 12, they start wondering what's real and what's not real. I can attest to this because I'm teaching 8th grade PSR right now. And the statistics pretty much bear it out just like it does everywhere in society. There's a lot of questions, there's a lot of confusion, and answers like we're going to see here are what is desperately needed.
Are you an atheist?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Are you an atheist?
I am. Yeah, I'm an atheist.
Yes, I am.
Alex, do you believe in God's existence?
No, I do not.
How long have you been an atheist?
I would say probably since I was about 15 years old.
So you don't believe in the existence of God?
No, not really.
What happened when you were 15?
I started questioning things, and I really just started to think about the logic behind everything.
For the most part, we are not shown the evidence for there being a higher power. If we were, I almost guarantee that almost every atheist would immediately agree to there being a higher power.
Are you atheist?
Yes. Yes.
Why?
Well,
just haven't seen enough evidence, I suppose.
I grew up in a Christian family, and just over the few years during high school and as I grew up, I just realized that there wasn't a lot of evidence to support that belief system.
So you saw the one lady who was put together pretty well, pretty articulate, had the necklace on. She's actually an associate professor. This all took place on a college campus. These are young adults who are at that stage where they have all the answers. And what answers they don't have, they're learning from their friends. And it's almost a badge of honor to show your intellect by not believing in these primitive superstitions of God and religion.
Well, I'll confess, when reading the recent Pew Forum study on why young people are leaving the Catholic faith, I just kind of sighed in exasperation. Now, I mean, I don't doubt for a second the sincerity of the kids who were reporting why they were leaving. And the reason I sighed, though, was, gosh, the reasons they gave were so answerable. The objections that they had, the reasons they said why they're leaving the church, were things that any decent apologist or evangelist could handle, you know? And what's happened, I think, the last 50 years or so is the Catholic intellectual world has largely dropped the art and science of apologetics, responding to the objections to the faith coming from the outside.
So Bishop Barron has done a lot of study in this. Please don't rush to read this. I'll read it to you as it moves along. These are anonymous quotes from students in my 8th grade PSR class. I think apologetics has changed my faith a lot and made me closer and more used to it. Apologetics is making a difference. Everyone should experience apologetic teaching. The info being taught is really important. Kids need this to be able to face all those who will try to bring them down. I know that God is real. That is what matters most. I think this class is making a difference because you have proved to me the wonder of God beyond doubt. These are 8th graders, 13, 14-year-olds about to go into high school. This is not the condition that I found all the men at the beginning of the year. They've really, really come a long way. And it's based on apologetics. So what is apologetics? In about 8 places in the New Testament, it's used as a noun. In about 27 places, it's used as an action or a verb. And then I found at least 79 places in the Bible where it's used as a synonym. But in 1 Peter 3:15, it's pretty clear cut. We are called to always be prepared to give a reasoned answer, apologia or apologia. It's the ancient Greek koine that the New Testament was written in. To everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. And not hope as in wishing, but almost like when people had hope chests before they got married. They didn't doubt they were going to get married. They just wanted to have these special things, and these were the things that prepared them for what they thought was going to happen. So we're all called to have a reason for the faith, and we're all called more times actually than we're called in the Bible to evangelize. So I would think that this is something that everyone needs to heed. It is the root word of apology, but it didn't mean to apologize back then. It was on par with being a legal term, almost like an attorney or a lawyer when they're defending their client against a false claim. So when someone gave their apology, like Socrates or Justin Martyr or some of our first bishops like Athanasius in front of emperors before they were fed to the lions, these were called their apologies. They were facts. So it's a ready response, a reasoned answer to the faith that is within us. Apologia can also mean verbal defense, as in defense of the reasonableness of our faith. There are some people who don't like the term because they don't like the idea of us being defensive or us apologizing for something. That's not what the word means. It predates Christ, so it's sort of grandfathered in. We don't get to change the term, even if we don't like it. I'm not a big fan because it doesn't really convey in this day and age what we want it to. It's taking the views handed to us by society at large and logically dismantling its unfounded and mistaken beliefs. As Bishop Barron said, it's easier than it sounds with some practice, and it is. I'm actually auditing part of a graduate course, and it's amazing how logical God's design is. And once you pick it up, it's pretty easy. So what are we trying to do here? Shane is logically trying to dismantle unfounded, mistaken beliefs. So just remember, apologetics as Shane is logically dumb. It's a good acronym though. They're big words. You can use your own words for them, but in the back of your head you can think dumb. Okay, what did he say? Because people will ask you what apologetics means, and it's a big subject. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around. This is the way I look at it. Apologetics is pre-evangelization, almost like when St. John came and was out in the desert preaching that Christ was coming, and he was making straight the path and clearing the way just like Elijah did. So what I do in the class for the 8th graders is I remove all the rubble. I clear the road away. I take away all those little nagging doubts and the unfounded beliefs and mistaken beliefs that they've heard, and we correct those. After that, evangelization almost takes care of itself. It's pretty amazing. All right, work with me here. All right, if you look at the number of stars it received and how many, 416. Oops, I'm looking at a different one than you are. This one's up in the thousands. I wanted to point out that these books top the New York Times bestsellers list. They top the Washington Post list. They stay up there. I think that one stayed up for over a year. If you look at those stars, they're not shrinking too much. That one right there scares me to death. How would you like that for a book for your grandchildren or your children? This one is kind of a misnomer. You'd see it on the bookshelf and you think, wow, maybe I'll learn about different religions. He's a confirmed atheist, and his whole point is to surreptitiously trick you into seeing that no faith is worthy of our joining. Even Bill Nye's in the business. He tells you how Darwin's the only true way. So as you can see, it's not a few books. It keeps going. How about that one? An Intelligent Person's Guide to Atheism. So if you're intelligent, you need that book. That one right there by Peter Boghossian. I've read it. Not only is it like drivel and garbage that any good evangelist or apologist could tear through, but the sad part is, if you had no experience in those areas, he sounds like he's making sense. I'd be very afraid for that man to go onto college campuses and tout what he's touting in that book. He does go to prisons and do it though. He's heard that's where people find God, so he's trying to make sure that they don't. Apologetics should and could never take the place of our faith, hope, and love, and is in no way a replacement or superior to evangelization. They go hand in hand, and actually sometimes you can't find the dividing line. If you're going to do one, you almost have to be prepared to do the other. I see apologetics as the handmaiden of our faith, hope, and love, and evangelism. It's what undergirds it and supports it. And we have to remember, through our reason, our intellect, that our intellect has veto power. We can't believe what we believe to be untrue. And that's written by a very famous author and Jesuit priest that teaches at Boston College. We can't love what we believe to be untrue. And there are many professors, they're over 500% more likely to be an atheist in college, and they're the ones who are trying to tear down what families have tried to instill in their children before going to college. So apologetics may not bring someone to faith, But those so-called rational or quasi-scientific or philosophical explanations from our secular world can certainly keep someone from the faith. And I'm seeing that already in 8th grade, where they've heard stories from their friends, and it impedes their ability to think about God and Christ and our faith in the terms that we would hope they would. So if it's true that our faith is denied and attacked more today than in the past, then apologists and evangelists had better explain and defend the reasonableness of our faith better today than in the past. And we're all called to be apologists, as 1 Peter 3:15 told us. So our Bible tells us in Psalms 19:1-4, "The heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech, night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech, they use no words, no sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out to all the earth, their words to the end of the world. In the heavens God has pitched the tent for the sun." My Alyssa thinks that looks like a bomb pop. So those are all real pictures from the Hubble telescope. If we think about it, that verse in Psalms predates any telescope, anybody's ability to see any of those things. So just the grandeur from the surface of the planets, not even being able to see these beautiful things, lets us know not only is there a God, but that he loves us, because science shows that everything has to be in its right place for human life to be here. So I wanted to show this. One of the pictures showed part of this. I think this is really cool. It's called a star birth cloud. It condenses, and you see on the right-hand side, when it condenses, that's where clusters of stars form. So the grandeur and the beauty is just amazing. That's from the Hubble telescope. That's at one stage of that star cluster's formation. And how someone can deny God when they look at real pictures like that from the Hubble telescope is beyond me. So now to the core of the book. Why do we need proof, per se, if we already believe in God? Being created in the image and likeness of God, we are constantly seeking ultimate truth, beauty, and goodness, which are found in their perfection only in God, but some look for substitutes in the world, what the Bible would call idols. So some people look for this in drugs, alcohol, power, prestige, money, things. And because we're created in his image, having his will and intellect, we seek to grab onto something. And this has a double meaning for me. Not only do we try to grab on to our ultimate parent, but we want our children to be able to look up to us and get the correct answers, to know that that there's real solid truth and that they can have a sense of security based on our faith. St. Augustine said, "You made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." This is the basic premise for what idolatry is. If you can't rest in him, you're still going to be restless. And for you that read Latin, I put that up for you. Much more recently, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre said, "There is a God-shaped hole in everyone," and I'm a firm believer in that. if you don't put the right thing in that God-shaped hole, people will try to stuff something else in there. So in 2012, the Pew survey said 20% of Americans have no religious affiliation, and I put SBNR after that. That stands for spiritual but not religious. I volunteer twice a week at the Cleveland Clinic in their spiritual care department. I've actually had people admitted who list their faith as spiritual but not religious. It just blows my mind. I don't even know what that means. I mean, Jesus told us, okay, don't do what they do, but do what they say. And he said he came to fulfill the law. So this idea that you can develop your own spirituality independent of a community is mind-blowing. 1/3 under 30 have no religious affiliation, and this is still 2012. The numbers have only increased. Pew's Religious Landscape Survey found 33% of those raised Catholic no longer self-identify themselves as Catholic. So they literally have lost their identity. And where in the past people have come back when they had children because they want them to get baptized and go through the whole route that they went through, they're not coming back. The statistics are getting worse and worse. So what can we do? Obviously, we can strive to expose our children, grandchildren, neighbors, our fellow man to the faith. We can provide ongoing faith formation in all areas of that faith touches our lives. And I put an asterisk there because what area of our life isn't touched by that? Yet people segregate it. I think to their detriment. Well, I'm sure to their detriment. So I like that Father gave me the ability to do this and that he has other things planned for the ongoing faith formation. We can do our best to create community, like small groups like this, or like during the day when we have every table full, which is nice, where everyone is known, valued, and accepted, and we share our personal experiences, because if we don't do that, then we don't learn the tools that maybe someone else has that work for them. We have to recreate the wheel. And we let others come to ownership of the faith at their own pace. You can only meet people where they're at. These 8th graders, there's no way that I could come at them and sort of push God into that God-shaped hole. You have to entice with the beauty of God, with the love of God, but you have to let them pick it up of their own free will. So how do we do it? One way we do it is getting answers to those who need them, and that's quite a few. Bishop Robert Barron has pointed out that science is the #1 cause of our young adults down to our adolescents being confused about the reality of God and the teachings of our faith. When he became auxiliary bishop in Los Angeles, he was lucky enough to have an audience with all the Catholic school teachers of the diocese, or at least in the region he's in. Los Angeles is huge. He said, "Can I see the hands of the science department?" And all the teachers raised their hand. He said, "Will you stand up?" And then he said, "How about the catechism or religion department?" He said, "You stand up." And then he said, "You two need to talk." I talked to a teacher who teaches at Padre Pio Academy in Cleveland. She's a science teacher. There's nothing in the curriculum that relates to our faith. I don't know if the books aren't out there, or they just need to be a little more prophetic, a little more outgoing with the message. It's definitely in the religion books, but it's not carried over into all the other subjects. Apologetics lends itself to that. When Bishop Barron took over as regent for the seminary in Chicago, he tried to impress upon all the priests that they should teach apologetics where it touched their subject, and he actually said he got pushback. It's not something that people feel comfortable with because they believe you have to be defensive or that you're apologizing for something, and nothing could be further from the truth. So scientific Christian apologetics is just one of many areas of truth under the apologetic umbrella. There's archaeology, Mariology, history, the Eucharist, biblical veracity, philosophy. Just about anywhere faith can touch your life, there are people who want to disprove Jesus and God and our faith, And there are people who are brave enough to study that area and say, every day we're finding more and more evidence to show what's in the Bible is historically true. That what we say about Mary is historically true from the earliest church fathers all the way to today. So it wasn't something that they turned on a dime and decided to include Mary in everything. Even Pope Francis wrote in his first apostolic exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel, we need to have an encounter between faith, reason, and the sciences with a view of developing new approaches and a creative apologetics which would encourage greater openness to the gospel on the part of all. And this didn't start with him. There have been church encyclicals that are pretty strong, starting just before Vatican I all the way to today. So this isn't something new, it's just something that hasn't trickled down very well yet. So you're going to see a big paragraph come up. Don't get anxious, I'm going to read that to you, but it's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's about ways of coming to know God. The person, and I'm going to jump around, the person who seeks God discovers certain ways of coming to know Him, called proofs for the existence of God. Proofs in the sense of converging and convincing arguments. These ways of approaching God from creation have a twofold point of departure: the physical world and the human person, which allows us to attain certainty about the truth. So what they're trying to say here is you're never going to look under a stone and find God and go, ooh, there He is. No, we don't have to worry about it. What they're saying is through our intellect, through our reason, we can see design, and we have our Bible, and we have all the prophecies that were fulfilled, over 300 of them. That's apologetics. You can find over 300 places in the Old Testament where Jesus, His birth and His life and His ministry and His death were all foretold. I only used 12 of them with the 8th graders, and they were blown away. So it is powerful stuff. So remember, don't take this stuff too seriously. That's me and my family right there. But just remember, you don't have to wrap your mind around all of this. You're about to see a little more that can be a little intimidating. So that's a representation of the Big Bang that was done by NASA for junior high and high school students. We actually have a couple of NASA scientists that are in our parish, which is pretty amazing. One lives in my development, and he assured me it wasn't a hearing or audio problem. He says there's no noise in space. So when you saw that, it was supposed to be silent. So most of us have heard of the Big Bang, even if it's just a TV show. What most of us might not have known is that the theory of the Big Bang comes to us from a Belgian physicist, Catholic priest, a Jesuit named Father George Lemaitre. You don't hear that because people don't want you to hear that. He used Einstein's formulas and developed the theory of the primordial atom. And the renaming of the theory was done by an astronomer named Sir Fred Hoyle. Now what's funny about that is astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle ridiculed Father Lemaitre's theory and said, yeah, everything just started from some big bang and here we are. He wasn't being kind. Up until 1927, everybody was thinking of the world as static, always being there, eternal. And what's interesting is that fine print says, by the way, Sir Fred Hoyle ended up seeing so much evidence for a creator that he later came to believe in God via science. So he had to put a little salt and pepper on his shoe and eat that and take his foot out. The prevailing view from the ancient times until Einstein's general theory of relativity was that the universe was static, still, eternal, always there. And the implication of Einstein's theory that the universe may have had a beginning was not initially accepted, not even by Einstein. He put in a factor called the universal constant to try to balance gravity on a razor's edge so that it would keep the universe static. When they finally proved that Father Lemaitre was right, he said it was the biggest mistake of his entire career to put that constant in there. He was mortified. 2 years after Father Lemaitre's assertion, American astronomer Edwin Hubble, the namesake of the Hubble Space Telescope, observed the galaxy movement, what they call redshift in the light, which shows them that the universe is moving away from us in every direction. So using a large telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory in California, the redshift supported the Big Bang. This observatory is way, way, way out in the boonies, so there was no light pollution, which would stop other observatories from seeing that. And in the 1920s, when Edwin Hubble was there, it was sort of like the NASA of its day. Everybody wanted to be there. But this is interesting. On May 20th, 1964, American radio astronomers Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias accidentally discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation. I'll tell you what that is in a second. But basically, it's the ancient first light that began saturating the universe 380,000 years after the Big Bang or its creation. They at first thought it was interference from bird droppings of all things and took countermeasures. They went up, shooed the birds away, cleaned it off, birds came back. They moved the birds about 20 miles away. They were homing pigeons. Next day, they were right back. Sadly, then they hired a farmer with a shotgun. No more problem with the birds. The poop was cleaned off, and they found that that cosmic background radiation signal was in every single direction that they pointed their antenna. But I'm betting by the directions of probably your father, you found this cosmic microwave background radiation before 1964 if you were old enough. If you remember that static between 3, 5, and 8, or between 43 and 25 in Akron, I remember being my dad's remote control, click, 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 and I remember being his antenna guy. You'd move the antenna around and then Dad would go, stay right there. And then you'd think, okay, but until when? He goes, no, don't move. So what you saw between the channels, why it always looked in a particular pattern, and why it wasn't different in between each channel, is because you were picking up with your TV antenna the cosmic microwave background radiation from 380,000 years after the Big Bang when light first started. So that was when he said, let there be light, and we see it on we don't see it on our TVs anymore. So what does the Big Bang actually gain us? First and foremost, the Big Bang and all the research that's gone into it gives credibility to the universe having had a beginning, just like the Bible tells us. So right there, we have a foundation. We have a starting point for conversation. Second, this leads us into having grounds for talking about a creator, not just with scientists like Pope Francis talked about, but closer to home with our children, grandchildren, our neighbors, because all effects, like our expanding universe, and that redshift, by definition, have a cause. Things don't spontaneously generate.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin? Or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working on Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
So when they talk about all those different theories, and you saw those placards falling on the floor, literally right after Edwin Hubble proved that all the galaxies were moving away from us, scientists immediately tried to find other theories that would negate the idea of creation. No one in that field at that time believed that the universe was created, and it was a paradigm shift that they didn't want to go down that road, because then you have to talk about a creator. So to this day, there are still three theories. That multiverse one that they talked about is one with a little asterisk. They're up to 10 to the 500th types of universes that can be created that way, to the point where scientists have given up on it. It's utterly ridiculous. If you've heard of string theory, that's another one where they're trying to prove that maybe there's other ways the universe came into existence, but even that people are starting to back away from, because after all these years, there's no evidence for it. The only evidence we have out there is for a point of creation. So this picture right here is the most detailed map to date of our universe. It was done by a few different observatories in a few different countries, came together. So that is a pictorial rendition of where everything is, and what you'll see is it's a finite thing. If you thought about that as a lima bean, God is out here, and that is a creation. So when they talk about God being timeless and immaterial and transcendent and all those things that we talked about, this is sort of what I show people to help them understand what is meant by that. Everlasting is something that's within time and lasts over and over, but something that's eternal. E in Greek means no or not, and eternal as time. So this is no time. So when people say, well, has God been around forever? Time didn't even exist until he created the universe. So it's an oxymoron, or it's a logical contradiction to try to talk about time in a place where there is no time, or to talk about space where there is no space. So I like this picture for sort of understanding that God is transcendent and he holds his creation in being. So during this time, I hope that you did see what difference this information could make in your life. I hope some of these ideas you find where you might see creation in a new way. I know when I look at the sky after learning some of this stuff, it just blows my mind. And do you see where this can create opportunities to share your faith? I know from the first week to the second week, I had more people show up. And I even had people that were there during the day come back at night for the very first one, and they brought their spouse, and one lady brought her spouse, her neighbor, and her daughter. So that was pretty cool. Did this talk shed more light on how much God loves you? This is all created, and we're going to get into this, but it's amazing how finely tuned all this stuff has to be for human life to be here. He created all of this with you particularly in mind before time began. Isaiah, who lived 700 years before Christ, wrote, "Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer." This is 700 years before Christ was even born, and the Jews didn't even look at Christ as a Redeemer, even in his own day. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am the Lord who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth. So remember, if some of this seemed daunting, don't worry about it. It'll click, and if it doesn't, it wasn't meant to be. You just put it up on a shelf and you share what you're able to grasp. But each week, something will click a little more. Each week is separate. It doesn't build on the previous week, but it is cohesive. Next week was the favorite class that my 8th grade had, and the comments that I got from the people who saw it thought it was pretty amazing. I'll leave you with a quote from the late Robert Jastrow, PhD. He was an astronomer, physicist, NASA scientist, and he was the creator and first director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies. For the scientists who have lived by faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance, he has pulled himself over the final rock, and he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.